All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Obviously, spread the hand of Valentine, WWE Hall of Famer. So I think I'll ask you a couple of questions you can talk about, and then we'll open it up to questions from everybody else. Basically, I guess the first thing to start is how did you get into professional wrestling? Like, what was the thing that led you to this career?
Well, actually, I never grew up with my father because of divorce, but he brought me down when I was about 18 years old to Texas, and I went on the road with him. He was a Texas heavyweight champion. I never been around my dad that much, and that was a great experience. And after about 4 months on the road, I wanted to be a wrestler, but he didn't want me to be a wrestler, but I eventually talked him into it. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why I had a 40-year-long wrestling career.
Who did you train? Did you train with your under your dad, or did you?
Actually, Stu Hart broke me in Canada, in Calgary, Canada, and that's Bret Hart's father, the Hart family, and he called his school the Dungeon, but actually it was just he had a big 3-story house, and I always thought it looked like the Munsters house. and but they called it the Dungeon because it was in the basement, and he had an old nasty mat, and that's where I first started training with Stu Hart, the legend Stu Hart.
Now, are the stories about the dungeon as real as your experience?
Well, I heard he broke arms, tore muscles. He didn't do any of that stuff for me. He he handled me with kid gloves because he knew Johnny Valentine. But actually, Johnny Valentine probably would have been glad if he hurt me, because that's his sense of humor. And but Stu was good with me, and so that's where I started the whole career, and that was in 1970, March of 1970.
So Stampede Wrestling, is that where you started your career?
My first match, yeah, was against Angelo Mosca. He's from Canada here, Hamilton, famous football player, King Kong Mosca. And I had my first match, officially my first pro wrestling match, not a workout, in front of a crowd at the Calgary Stampede auditorium. And I lasted about 4 minutes.
So, how do you get to the WWE? Like, how does that, or WWF at that time? How does that come about?
Well, it took a while to get there. I started in 1970, so 1979 is when I first went to WWF. I like to call it WWF because E is kind of hard for me to say. E. WWF sounds more masculine, more rough. Okay. Actually, they never wanted to change it to WWE, but the WWF was worldwide something animal federation out of London, England, and so they had the first copyright for that. So Vince wanted to get away from the wrestling just being a shoot, as it were, and so he's entertainment, so it's entertainment now. But my era, it wasn't, well, I mean, it was entertainment, but we worked a lot harder on it not being entertainment as far as being the real thing, a shoot. But so I went around all over the United States and Canada, and in 1976 I really got my first break with Mid-Atlantic, and after my dad had that horrible plane crash, and so they brought me in, teamed me up with Ric Flair. So that was 1976. So Mid-Atlantic was on fire. You had Wahoo McDaniel, Blackjack Mulligan, Ricky Steamboat, and it was a great territory. And we did Virginia, North and South Carolina, part of Georgia, and we also came up to Canada, to Toronto and to Buffalo. Buffalo's not part of Canada. What am I saying?
Close enough.
So there is a border there, and they let you know it. So in '79, they asked for me to come up to New York, Vince McMahon Sr., so I went up there. He's actually the first one that I never used the figure 4 anywhere, and so it was Vince McMahon Sr. says, you need a hold, because I went out, what they do when you go to New York, I'm still in the mid-Atlantic, and I flew up there. So I'm doing TVs every 3 weeks up there, so I did 4 or 5 months of television before I was ever in the territory. And so he wanted me to do something besides the suplex and my elbow to finish the guy out, so figure 4 leg lock. Do I know how to do it? No, but I learned in the dressing room how to do it and started doing it, and guys were being carried out on a stretcher. He knew how to get a wrestler over and get a wrestler hated, and the figure 4 leg lock was a big deal for me, so it was great. So 1979, that's WWF, and I stayed in WWF till '94, so long time.
Do you have a favorite rivalry or a favorite match that you could talk about?
Well, I enjoyed my matches with Tito. I didn't even have to talk to Tito. It was just like he was a little bit greener than I was. You know, I was been in the business a lot longer. I enjoyed all my feuds, but Tito was probably the easiest because I didn't have to say nothing to him, and he had that. I'd beat him down, and he had that fire. So when he made a comeback, you know, it was just wow, you know, it was just explode. And he knew how to do it. But I enjoyed working with Bob Backlund. I enjoyed working with Pedro Morales. Chief Jay Strongbow was a night off. I did a thing where I broke his leg, like I did with Wahoo. And easiest matches in the world, and we sold out everywhere we went, just because they loved Chief Jay and they hated me. So a lot of good memories, a lot of good years. I got to mention Rugged Ronnie Garvin. He was one of my favorite opponents because I could beat on him as hard as I wanted to, and he could beat on me as hard as he wanted to. And we did something that nobody else was doing. We were selling believability because those chops and everything, they hurt, you know. So yeah, but we enjoyed it. I enjoy pain. Not too much anymore, but now the only pain I have is in my ass from sitting on airplanes flying, because I live in Las Vegas and all my work is on the East Coast. So how did that happen? Did you say? Because I used to live in Florida, but my wife, who's the boss of the family, said we're moving to Las Vegas. So, but I'm starting to get some work out there now. Got some, I mean, after all, second biggest city in the world, or United States, is Los Angeles, and it's right there. But you know, they don't have as much as, or fanatic wrestling fans as New York City or the East Coast. So, but I'm starting to get other stuff. They don't have wrestling conventions out there. I mean, Los Angeles, why wouldn't you have a wrestling convention out there? And but they're starting to get a little more. So I'm pushing on it.
So you mentioned something there about how in your time that they were selling the believability and there was more of a shoot. Do you find it, I guess, hard to watch the wrestling today because it's maybe more about the entertainment side than it is?
Well, a couple of years ago, I couldn't watch it at all, or maybe 3 or 4 years. I don't know how long, but I didn't like the product because there was too much talking, and I hate the interviews in the ring. I hate that concept, but I understand sometimes it's appropriate to do it that way. But the wrestling part, I wasn't too happy with. I hate all that running, you know, Mexican style wrestling. But now, you know, I've watched it lately. It seems like it's getting better, or maybe I'm imagining. I don't know. It's better to watch because it seems that they're trying to get more. Is there a word realism? Is that a word? I don't know. It seems more authentic or more real, and so instead of sitting and watching it and throwing up, I'll watch it for a while. I don't like all the girl wrestling though, but even though some of the girl wrestlers are better than the boy wrestlers or men wrestlers, you better watch out. You know, they'll take your job. But I don't like girl wrestling. I'm not a fan of of the martial art girl wrestling. I hate to see women beating each other up. You know, women are supposed to be feminine, elegant. I like watching girl tennis and girl swimming and girl softball. That's where they should stay.
So I guess a big honor in your career was the Hall of Fame. Can you talk about a bit about that?
Yeah. I've been out of the WWF for a while, or WWE. See, I left in '94, so I got a call from Vince about 4 months before that happened. So it was at WrestleMania 20, and he said he was going to do a big Hall of Fame thing. He put 10 guys in, 9 other besides me that time. So it was a great honor, and it was well deserved. uh, I'm not blowing my own horn here, but I mean I deserved it, and everybody else on the stage there. I think everybody that's in the Hall of Fame deserved it. I mean anybody that does 20 years or better and on the grind and all that kind of thing deserves it. And you know, I'm not going to say one guy doesn't deserve it more than the others.
Okay, so I guess the one of the things that, and I've done a couple of these with other wrestlers. Sometimes there's the stories on the road. Sometimes there's a funny one that they like to recant. Do you have any funny story on the road that you can share with everybody?
Well, a lot of mine are X-rated, so I'll tell you one about my dad and Ric Flair though. Before my dad had that horrible accident, so Johnny Valentine was the number one bad ass in the Mid-Atlantic NWA area, and Ric Flair was kind of his protege, his student, and so I did a lot of tag team matches together. So they were driving from Raleigh, North Carolina, back to Charlotte, where everybody lived in Charlotte, and my dad, they were drinking beer, and my dad would not stop to let Rick take a pee on the side of the road. And he's, please stop, stop, please stop. And he'd be slamming on his brakes. And Rick's like, ready to pee his pants. So the Raleigh, North Carolina is north of Charlotte, and we never took the freeway because it went way over like that. So we always took 49 to some other road. But they were all 2-lane roads. And so sparsely populated, a lot of country road there. And so finally my dad stopped. He said, okay, get out. And then he drove off and left him there. So Ric Flair's out there with this back when he had a lot of hair. And that frizzy blonde hair. He finally got a ride, pretty quick. That's a funny story. It's clean enough that I get it.
Well, that's all the questions that I have. So I'm going to open it up to everybody else here to ask Greg as many questions as we have time for. So
I only got 5 minutes.
I've got a professional and then a personal question. The professional question is, what was your favorite territory to work before you signed on with Vince McMahon? And the personal question is, what's your favorite casino to go hang out in when you're in Vegas?
Well, my favorite casino is Caesars, because my wife won $6,000 the other day there. I don't gamble, but I love the sports book, and I love to bet baseball and basketball and football. So I love that, and I win. I got a pretty good. Baseball is a little tricky this time of year.
Just don't bet on the Jays.
Yeah, bet against them.
Yeah, there you go.
The only problem with baseball is the odds. At least on basketball and football, they give you the spread, so it's easier. Anyway, what was the other question?
About your favorite territories to work in before you signed with WWW.
Okay, Florida, number one, because a lot of hot women down there. Oh.
It's a good reason.
So it was 1974. In fact, I was wrestling in Toronto at the Maple Leaf Gardens. The only reason I got there is because my dad talked Jack, I was still pretty green, so he talked Jack Tunney into bringing me in on a card that he was main eventing against somebody. And so I got to wrestle at Maple Leaf. It was like 1973, the end of it. And I was working Buffalo a lot, in Cleveland in that area, and I met Jack Briscoe, who was the world champion at the time, and he asked me if I'd like to come to Florida. And I said, "Are you kidding me? I'd love it." So I went to Florida, loved it, and I loved the pretty girls and the beaches, and the wrestling was great. It was real wrestling, kind of like we're talking about. It was Eddie Graham was the boss, and he was all about wrestling and wrestling and wrestling, and not too much punches, and none of this running around crap. It's very, very, it taught me a lot. And my second favorite was Mid-Atlantic. Basically the same thing. And I became Flair's partner. And I got my first divorce. First. And then I had a second one. But I'm with my third wife, and we've been together. Sometimes it takes a while to learn how to do this thing. We've been together 23 years, and I found out the way to keep a marriage together is agree with everything she says and have no opinion. I have my own opinion, but I learned to keep my mouth shut about it. As long as she cooks the meals, I help her load the dishwasher and wash clothes. She gets mad at me when I do that. Don't be doing that, but I don't want her to do all that. But I do go shopping for her. I like to shop, and food's a big part of my life. And I do that for her, and she's a great cook. So Italian and Spanish, bad tempered, but great woman.
Some questions?
Quick one. When you first had your first match, did you wrestle as Greg Valentine?
No, I can't remember.
How about when you worked that card in Toronto where your dad made a badge?
I didn't use his name for a while. I was with this guy named Don Fargo, so I was Johnny Fargo.
Okay.
And that made my dad happy, and it made me happy because my dad was such a big superstar. I was still green and learning the business, and so I was Johnny Fargo. I finally asked his permission to be Greg Valentine when I went to Los Angeles, and then I went to Florida in '74. It was Greg Valentine. but I wrestled at his brother because back then, you know, my dad was 45, 46, 7 years old, and he didn't want people to know how old he was. And back then, if you were 40 something, people would look at you differently and like you're old. You know, now it's different, you know. So that's why. But I was Greg Valentine, his younger brother, until he retired. So
The question I always had is, and it's kind of a silly one, but you can probably answer better than anybody. I know there's a lot of prep work that goes into preparing for a big match or anything, especially one of the headliners, like say WrestleMania or something like that. And my biggest thing I always liked, so it was right in my prime when I was really watching it, was WrestleMania 3. And I just always wondered from your perspective, somebody, as I was a big Dream Team fan, how does it affect you when you're going to go out there in front of 93,000 fans when you walk through that curtain, as opposed to say something like this where you're more intimate and then you're going into a big venue? Does that throw you off a lot? Is it really a lot harder for you? Because obviously hearing and everything would be, your senses would be down because there's quite a bit of people there and a lot of noise and everything. And is it hard to concentrate and focus on what you do, and is it ever throwing you off? I guess is what I'm getting at. When you have like that big of a crowd, I can't imagine 93,000 fans.
no, that doesn't even bother you because all I remember at that Silver Dome in Detroit was just a whoo, whoo of the crowd. It was like a big echo chamber, you know. I tell you what's hard is doing an independent show and there's 4 people on the front row and 10 in the back. And then, you know, that's hard. It's harder to wrestle in front of a little crowd than it is a big crowd. Big crowds are great. That kind of a crowd, 93,000 people, that doesn't happen too often. But I've wrestled in front of a lot of packed places, you know, 20,000 or better. It's always better to have a crowd like that than a small crowd. Small crowd, you can hear some smartass on the third row, "Hey, you fat son of a bitch," you know, whatever, you know. So, but you could hear in the Garden that people were. My favorite crowd, Toronto got nothing to go away with. That was a good place to wrestle too, but Maple Leaf Gardens. But the Madison Square Garden seemed to be my favorite. It was so hard for some guys to pop the crowd in the Garden, but I could always do it. So the Garden was home for me. They seemed to like me there. Seemed to like to hate me there. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were.
Yeah, no, I do.
Go ahead, man.
All right, great. First of all, thank you. Hey, I don't watch wrestling anymore, but when I watch wrestling, it was like right in your heyday at the WWE from like early '80s to mid '90s. I always enjoyed watching you work. Um, you worked with a lot of guys: Tito Santana, Don Bronco, Ricky Steamboat. Who's your favorite guy to travel with?
Travel with? I didn't travel with my opponents.
Because you had to maintain. Okay, so
Yeah,
you had a lot
because
of great tag team partners too.
I didn't want to be like the story of the Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan getting caught, pulled over in New Jersey, and they had cocaine and marijuana on them, and they had a big angle going, and he ended up firing both of them, but they brought him back. But you know that's I don't like. I like to try to protect the business, and I'm out there beating the hell out of someone, and you letting him beat the hell out of me, and then we're not going to go have a beer together. And privately is fine, you know, but not in front of the crowd.
So, of your tag team partners,
Pardon me?
of your tag team partners, who was your favorite guy to travel with?
I guess Brutus. We got along good, you know. Yeah, I would say Brutus.
Any good stories?
No, I'd be actually not. I don't know about stories, you know, with him. We just drove around and smoked pot. I didn't drink a lot of beer because I didn't, I wanted to. Smoking pot would keep me awake, and I wouldn't get bored so much. And we played a lot of music, and so B-Pick was good. He'd roll the joints, and I drove. We'd have a few beers, but not to get tipsy and DUIs. That's when they was really out to get you then. But if they walked up their car and smelled dope, that was something else too. But I was pretty good. I didn't speed too much, and so I kept it between the lines. I had one of my favorite guys, and it was about the only guy that I had to wrestle all the time, and I had a big major feud was with Roddy Piper, because if I didn't ride with Piper, I drove by myself, and so we would sneak around and do it together. We enjoyed that a lot.
Do you remember whose idea was for the shin guard? And was it awkward at first to wrestle with that, or was it just kind of easily part of the gear? Did it fit in easily for you?
Actually, I had a meeting with Vince McMahon in Titan Towers. I remember this. And I went in there. I requested the meeting, so I went in there, and I'd been there a while, and I wanted to do something to give me a kickstart, because I've been there a long time. And so he came up with he says, let's do something with a figure four, make it more. So he came up with, we kind of did it together. I'll give him props for him saying some kind of put something on your leg. I came up with the shin guard because I'm a big baseball fan. I'm thinking, well, you take the shin guard, take the knee thing away. In fact, I see baseball players do that now with a catcher's shin guard. And I'm thinking, yeah, so I could do that and then turn it around and it look like, I'm using that as an advantage. So, yeah, it worked out very well for me. Except it started hurting my knee after a couple of years of doing that, but it was a good deal.
I also wanted to ask about working with Jimmy Hart. Did you prefer working solo, or did you like having Jimmy around for your matches?
I love having Jimmy Hart there. It's always, a lot of guys would say I didn't like managers. I had the Grand Wizard, I had Luscious Johnny Valiant, I had Captain Lou Albano, and Jimmy Hart. It's great to have a manager. It really is. Not that I needed him to talk for me or anything, but it's just a little added prop.
Of all the managers that you've had, which one was your favorite to work with?
I liked them all. I always say Jimmy Hart, but I really didn't have a favorite. And there's another guy, Sir Oliver Humperdinck, another guy that was a good friend. And actually, I moved him into my house because I said I might as well just have him there at the corner of the house. But I liked all of them. I really can't say a favorite. I guess maybe Jimmy Hart. Captain Lou was the funniest one, though. He was a trip. He'd get drunk, cuss Vince McMahon out. I enjoyed that. We always went to these dinners every 3 weeks. We used to do the television tapings in Allentown, PA, and Hamburg, PA. We do 2 days of it. And then certain guys would be invited to the dinner with Vince McMahon Sr. and Little Vince or whatever sitting here, and then all the guys. And Sergeant Slaughter was always there. I was always invited. Gorilla Monsoon, Captain Lou Albano, Grand Wizard, all the managers, Freddie Blassie. And then by the time the dinner was getting to a close and Captain Lou was getting really drunk, he'd start cussing Vince McMahon and he'd cussing the kid out. He goes, "You wait. Anything happens to the old man, that kid is going to take over and he's going to walk right over the top of us." he's not going to even, and you know, a lot of that came true because he became an arrogant, but you know, I understand when Vince passed away, Vince Jr. had all this, and he was a smart, genius guy, but he had to distance himself from the talent, and I understand that now. I didn't understand it then. Why won't Vince say hi to me anymore? Well, he's a boss now, so I understand that. I understand it now. You understand a lot of things after you turn 60, like what you shouldn't have done, you know, what you shouldn't have bought a new car every year, you know.
What kind of advice would you give to a young man who's interested in wrestling? Like about the life and what to expect in life?
Oh, he's interested in it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I can understand why you're interested in it. It's a different ball game now because I guess someone's saying there's a lot of independent stuff going on, but there's only one major league. That could change any day, but back in my era, there was like all different territories, and you could get into it and learn here and go to another place and learn there until you came to the big time in New York. So it was different, and but I would say that make sure you have a backup plan. You know, and I'm sincere about that because there's a lot of guys that get into wrestling and when it's over, and they're packing groceries at Winn-Dixie. So yeah, you make sure you got a job, a backup job, or an education. Wrestling, I would never tell anybody to go do it because they might not have as much luck. And a lot of mine was luck, and a lot of it was timing. You know, timing is a big thing. Timing is all about. My whole life has been timing, and I think we're all in this time capsule. Timing's such a big thing, but just be careful. You know, but if you love it, you love it. You know, best advice I could give you. I used to tell guys, forget about it, quit, don't do it. In my honest opinion, down deep, you know. But I can't, for me it was different because I had a dad, and every time I'd beat down and blow it up and wouldn't feel like doing any more, I would think of Johnny Valentine and say, I gotta be as tough as he is. So I had something to push me through because the promoters and some of the other boys are out to get you. And that's why I used to travel by myself a lot because I don't want to sound like I'm prejudiced or anything, but my dad, he would, instead of having guys, because there used to be a saying, telegraph, telephone, and tell a wrestler. And you tell a wrestler and it gets spread, they'd find out about it in San Francisco or something. So he would never ride with other guys. He told me to get a bunch of Mexicans to ride with him. So because they wouldn't gibby gab like the other wrestlers, right? So I just get a couple Mexicans to ride with me. Not that I'm not being racist now. I mean, because they're 500,000 came across the border, I'm not being racist. You guys don't have that problem. You just have all the Indians coming in. I was at immigration the other day, and there was like 35 Indians in front of me. So, anyway, just saying.
I know it's probably just an estimate. I'm not looking for an exact number, but could you maybe guess at how many local tough guys were stupid enough to try and pick a fight with you after the matches?
You know what? They'd pick on Haku instead.
Yeah.
Figure that one out. I know a lot of
They're not very
people.
smart.
I know a lot of people have heard about how tough Haku is, and he was the toughest. I mean, he chopped me when they were the Islanders. He chopped me in the chest one time, and he wasn't even mad at me. And I felt like my heart skipped about 5 beats. Big, tough guy. So I heard a couple horror stories where guys would pick on him at the bar, and I would be at, well, some of them, I'd be at that same bar, but I ended up leaving. Nobody would pick on me. But they would go pick on him because, I don't know, because he was Tongan or whatever, Samoan, and he would take them down and tear their eyeball out, you know. So nobody ever messed with me. I guess, you know, I intimidated him. I certainly didn't try to but you know, I was no goody two shoes either. So, but nobody ever bothered me.
That was actually the question I was kind of going with there, but I know I see the size of your hands there, Greg. When I shook your hand up there, was one thing
These hands,
I just can't imagine.
every time I try to do something at home, and my wife goes, "Those hands are yours. You can't do nothing." She calls me fumble fingers because I can't hold on to nothing. I'll be holding on to a glass and I'll just drop it and break it. So they're good for nothing. The only thing they're good for is chopping meat. You know, not much for anything else. I can't type on my phone.
That's one thing I remember being at the gardens in Toronto there, seeing it. I remember you coming out, we were way up in the fifth area. It was the first wrestling event I ever got to. And I remember your big gown you had and everything.
Yeah.
It really stood out. It was really flashy and everything. And then, but boy, when you were chopping, you could sure hear the chops all the way up to the top. And I can only imagine what that's like down there. And you know, everyone at the time, you know, oh, wrestling's fake, wrestling's this. I couldn't imagine being on the receiving end of one of those, like you said there. And just the size of your hands and getting chopped by people like that, I just.
The ones that you heard the most probably didn't hurt the guy so bad. It's the ones that just go, fuck. They go, oh. So, you know, I would be chopping a guy and he would hit me back, but he wouldn't know how to throw him. And he just, boom, right in the middle of your chest.
Do you have a lot of lingering health issues now that you're in the business and come back to haunt you after such a
Well,
40-year career?
knock on wood, I'm healthy, you know. My wife is not as healthy as I am because of high blood pressure, but that's Spanish Italian, and we keep it under control. But you know, maybe I make her blood pressure go up. I don't know. But my blood pressure is fine. Everything seems to be fine, and I'm lucky, you know. Yeah. Because a lot of guys are passing away, and it's really sad. And I mean, I remember 10, 15 years ago, I used to talk about all these guys passing away, you know, and going back to Rick Rude and all the other guys that passed away. And it's not always, I mean, back then they were blaming the drugs. But now, you know, some of these other guys, well, maybe the other guys are, you know, maybe it's the lifestyle but like Nikolai Volkov, there was nobody that had a healthier life plan than Nikolai did. And he was always telling me, do this and do that, and don't eat this and don't eat that. And then he ends up having a heart attack and dying. So there's just, I guess it's the luck of the draw, and just have faith in God, and then you won't be scared of dying, you know.
You always were a good showman, and you know, it's just such an honor to actually see you here in our backyard.
I loved wrestling. I loved it. I love it so much I still want to get in there and do it. And but Julie doesn't want me to do it. You're end up hurting yourself. He'll have a heart attack in the ring. I always used to say, people say, how do you want to die? I go, I want to die in the ring. but I really don't want to die in the ring. There's a couple guys that's died in the ring, and it's not a Moondog Spot or something. He died in the ring. I guess the guy was, yeah, that's his reason. But I didn't know who he was.
He was in WCW, probably around the same time you were there, but there was probably like 400 guys in WCW when you were there, so.
Yeah, Moondog Maine. You remember the Moondogs?
Yeah.
So someone was wrestling him in a I know it was one of the Rock and Roll Express, the blonde guy. And it was a single match or something, and he was kicking him in the corner, kicking him, and he kept saying, "Get up, get up." And he never got up. He died right there in the ring. So that's not a good way to go.
Speaking of guys that have died in the ring, Owen and Bret Hart would have been just kids when you were training with Stu Hart. You got any memories of them as boys?
Yeah, I remember them coming down and watching. Mainly Bret, because Bret's I'm about 6, 7 years older than Bret. And Owen was just a little bitty kid. Well, it was terrible how Owen died, but that was all accident. And he hated that thing where they let him come down on that runner or whatever it was called. He hated it. He didn't like doing it. I would never have done that for all the tea in China. I'm scared of heights. I'd go up about as high as I could go was the top rope, and come off the elbow. I don't like heights. So that's really sucked because he was a great guy.
Like the rhythm and blues gimmick. How much tea did you
You told me you were going to ask me that.
Yeah, that was a good segue with the tea thing. So, because that was quite a departure from the Great Valentine that everybody knew. One day you're Great Valentine, the Hammer. Next year, it was Great Elvis. Right? I think that's what they said at one time. And he came out with the jet black hair. And
well,
how did that come about?
Rhythm and Blues was already together with me with the blonde hair, and then they wanted to push it even further.
That's right.
And for about 5, 6 months, I knew what they wanted to do. And Jimmy Hart, and he wanted me to dye my hair. And I didn't give a damn about that. I mean, no big deal. And I'd been there a long time, so I was looking to stretch out a few more paychecks. And me and Honky were friends, and we were already together. But I really didn't want black hair. And I'll tell you another thing is my wife, Julie, she didn't want the black hair. And she told me, if you come home with that, because I told her they were trying to talk me into do this. She goes, if you come home with that black hair, I'll kick you out. So we're in Phoenix, Arizona, and finally I got tired of Jimmy Hart. He kept bugging me about it. I said, well, we're in the dressing room in Phoenix, and I said, do you have I'm sorry, I touched that, it's okay. It's still blinking. So he had the black hair dye with him. That's it. He'd been carrying this thing around, and we're doing television, so I said, go ahead, do it. I'm sick of this. So I came out with the black hair, but I didn't have the costume and anything really to go along with it. But they wanted to do it because of the shock value, and they wanted to shock the people. And Honky liked the idea, so I did it. I went home and watched myself. Oh, first of all, I went home, flew from Phoenix back to Tampa, and I'm waiting for my wife to pick me up. And she kept driving past me because she didn't recognize me with black hair. Or she said she didn't. She finally picked me up. I can't believe you did that. You sold out. A lot of fans said I sold out. But you know what? It got me some more paychecks, and they hated it, so that's what I liked. Because gone so long in that area that in the WWF that they weren't hating me anymore. So now they really hated me because I sold out and had black hair. And so then I really, speaking of departure, was because I was always believable and but the wrestling had taken a change for the worse, in my opinion. And they had all these gimmicks and stuff coming around. They had a guy coming out with a bulldog, the dog coming out, and a snake coming out, and a lizard with Steamboat, and the pig with Uncle Elmer, and so they had all these gimmicks going on, and so I said I'll be a gimmick too, and so I invested some money into it, and I thought rhythm and blues was getting over, and we used to do that guitar and act like we were singing, and to me, I said, you know what? This is better than beating somebody up and getting beat up, and nobody believes in wrestling anymore anyway now, so, or that much, and so I enjoyed it, and everything I ever did, I always put 100% or better into it, and so that answered your question, yeah.
Actually, I like the gimmick. I really, again, big departure from what we were used to seeing with you, but
Yeah, you know
there
what?
was shock value.
When I look back at the stuff, I didn't like it when I was actually the first few months I did it, but we were only together about a year. But I looked at the stuff that as I added to it and got a jacket and all that kind of stuff, and got used to doing it. It was fun, and I could see how we could get heat, and I could see how Rhythm and Blues could have drew some big money. But Vince McMahon signed the Road Warriors, and that was it for us because we were in line to get the belts from the Hearts. And when he signed the Road Warriors, he brought Honky into the booth with him to talk, do the play-by-play or whatever. And he brought me in and said, listen, we're going to lay you off, but you're still going to make money. I'm going to send you to Japan once a month. So I said, okay, whatever. And so that worked out good, you know. I went to Japan for a week every month, and it was easy. Eventually I came back, and Honky couldn't stand being next to Vince anymore, so he ended up quitting. But now they have a love fest going on because Honky was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and they're all lovebirds now.
All right, any more questions?
Just one question.
There's one more. I got to go sell some more pictures.
Is there anyone that you just, I don't know if you can say that, that just did not like, you don't even have to use names, or anybody you just did not like, or
Please use names.
Who?
like that just off behind the scenes in real life is just a real dick, pardon me, but just the guy that just was not a nice person. Anybody that, is there anybody you came across in the business that's like that?
You know, I can't really say I dislike anybody because from where I mean, there's guys that I didn't like to work with or wrestle because but they were there for a reason. So I learned how to work around it. You know, I was a good guy that would learn how to work around a situation and end up bringing them to my style. I really got along with everybody, you know, because I think that was the way to go. And there's certain guys that I really didn't despise anybody. Yeah, I really can't answer that. Most of the guys that got into the WWF had already been weaned out, and most of the guys that came in, I didn't like all the gimmick stuff at the end of it. And you know, Vince seemed like he wanted guys with great bodies, you know. But the only thing when you have all that muscle-bound body, you can't wrestle that good, you're not loose and stuff. And, but I can't, you know, I can't blame anybody for that. That's just the way it was. No regrets.
All right. Well, that's about our time. So thank you everybody for coming.
All right, just leave your donations at the door. I feel like a preacher. God be with you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, guys.